Now we have the opportunity to have a discourse with some key leaders in the state who not only have extensive experience and background on a lot of these issues, but have great access right now to drive this work. And so first I'd like to introduce Sue Burr, who has been working in and around education policy for over 30 years, starting in the Senate with work as a principal consultant with the Senate Education Committee and the Senate Appropriations Committee. Sue has a long history in this work and is currently a member of the state board and also an appointee to the new collaborative that we've been talking about. Secondly, I would like to introduce Rick Simpson. Rick, again, has over 4 decades of influence in California. Yep, I did it. A lot of those things that you saw David lay out, Rick had a hand in, and is
just the good stuff.
Just the good stuff, excellent. And so Rick is with the Assembly and works in the Speaker's office and has actually served 8 speakers over the last many years. And then the final person I'll introduce is Michael Watkins, who is part of the collaborative as well. He's the other board member that was recently appointed. And Michael is the county superintendent for Santa Cruz and has been an educator and in and around this work for over 35 years, working in special education, career technical education, and other key areas. So please join me in welcoming them, and we'll get to the conversation. Sue, would you like to start?
First, is this on? Can you hear me?
Take this one.
Is this better? There we go. Thanks. First, I do want to thank Dave Conley for taking me on a bad trip back through my policy life. I told Linda that it was like deja vu all over again. And Rick and I probably are the 2 people in this room who were there at the beginning of certainly of PSAA, the creation of the Academic Performance Index. And I will say I've probably had many Diane Ravitch moments over the last 5 or 6 years about, boy, we thought we knew it all, and boy, were we wrong. So I just want to say that I approached this work with great humility. We thought we knew the answers to what the state should be doing relative to local school districts, and I think we sent some pretty wrong messages and ended up sending folks down the wrong path. And that's some of what I think David shared, that this notion of punitive accountability certainly does not get the results or the best results on behalf of students and teachers. So I just want to sort of set that as context. As I was listening to the first panel and then to Linda, I was sort of thinking of what do I think are the key virtues as we approach this work? And there's 3 of them that come to mind for me. The first one is trust. The second one is patience. And the third one is adaptability. And I just want to say a word about each one of those. With respect to trust, I think we, at the state level, we have to trust that local educators and local administrators are going to do what's absolutely right on behalf of the students that they serve. I believe to my core that no educator enters a classroom trying to do something bad to children. They enter it because they have a love for children, because they believe in the best possible outcomes for those children, and they're going to do everything they possibly can to make that happen. There's some things that happen in the system that inhibit their ability to do that, and that's really what we have to think about doing. I think we at the state level, we have a huge task in front of us to rebuild the trust of educators and administrators that we're not there to sanction them. There has to be a huge shift right now to say, hey, we're serious about local accountability, we're serious about giving you the authority, you the responsibility that you so richly deserve at the local level to do the best on behalf of your students. And that's a big uphill pull because we've existed for 20 years now in a completely different mindset. So I sort of have trust really in the forefront of what the virtues are that we have to rely on. Patience, again, David's slide of the last 25, 30 years of going one direction and then shifting and going another direction and shifting. It takes a very long time to build a coherent system. And everybody in the system, whether it's at the legislature, it's at the state board, it's in the governor's office, has to say, I'm willing to be patient, that it's going to take some time for us to implement things appropriately and in a way that's meaningful. And my last one was adaptability. I think one thing I picked up on what Janelle said, which I think is very important, is we have to be willing, and I think build into our state laws and policies, that we're going to revisit these things periodically and say, hey, what was working, what wasn't, let's make adjustments. We picked the 800 target for the API back in 1992. How many times did we change it? 0. So even though we knew there were things we should be adjusting, for a variety of reasons, we didn't change it. And so we weren't adaptable, and I think that's one thing that I've certainly learned, that we do need to be adaptable in this system as we go forward. So those are the 3 virtues I think we have to keep in mind as we think about building a new accountability system. The other one, and this sort of goes along with the trust piece, and I'm going to morph into what the CCEE is doing or not yet doing, is we have to build in self-reflection. You've heard a couple of mentions about evaluation rubrics being developed. Part of the statute that created the local control funding formula requires the state board to develop evaluation rubrics. And from the very beginning, we got a lot of questions of, we need those rubrics first. It's as I told Linda, it's like your student in your classroom going, what are you going to grade me on? That's really what I want to know about. And we kept saying, no, we're trying to build this system and build into it self-reflection. And that's really what we hope the evaluation rubrics will begin as, that districts will be able to say, here are the priorities we set for ourselves. Did we meet those targets? Where do we need to provide additional help? What direction should we need? Were there way too many? Lots of questions. But fundamentally, they will ask those questions. I think Rick Miller did a fantastic job of saying, here's what the core districts have done. They started in one direction, had certain targets, decided, gee, those weren't quite the right ones, or they weren't refined enough. That's the kind of work that we see going on under the evaluation rubric. So I think we have to really value self-reflection again at the local level in a very transparent environment. That's what Linda talked about. So just from a practical standpoint, just to kind of fill you in on CCEE, this is the first time Michael and I have seen each other because CCEE hasn't met yet. We just got constituted about 3 or 4 months ago. There are 5. There are 5 members who are on the CCEE: a district superintendent, Sandy Thorstensen from Whittier Union High School District, the county superintendent, who's Michael Watkins, a teacher appointed by the speaker, who's Tim Sobrante, the superintendent of public instruction, Tom Tollickson, and then a member of the state board designated by the president of the board, and that's me. And our first meeting is on February 25th. So at that time, I think that's probably largely going to be an organizational meeting. How are we going to hire people? Ken Young, who's the Riverside County superintendent, serves as our fiscal advisor, and that's not the right word, not fiscal advisor. But he's our organizing entity through the Riverside County Office of Education. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but at least from my perspective, again, I'm going to be approaching it with the 3 virtues that I mentioned, a great deal of humility, and asking for all the advice we possibly can from people like you that are in this room.
Great. Thank you, Sue. Rick, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm having flashbacks to the 1980s and 1990s when all these changes in the testing system took place. I guess just a couple of random comments. First, I guess I would say it's about damn time. We have been flip-flopping back and forth. I had a sort of an epiphany experience a couple of years ago listening to Linda talking about Theory X and Theory Y at a PTA meeting or something here in town. And it kind of crystallized for me the difference in the fundamentally different approaches to school accountability and performance and roles and respective roles and things, and articulating how really what we ought to be trying to do, our role as a state, is to facilitate the capacity building, the investment in human capital the sort of system and school and district level improvement activities that can help them do a better job, as opposed to, what are the right incentives or disincentives or rewards and sanctions to move a system. And that kind of different way of thinking about the world, I think, has changed a lot of our behavior. There are still rigidities in the system, though. I go back to what Janelle said earlier about the school finance system. That is terribly, terribly important. It is a state-driven system so far, still. That means the marginal dollar, the next dollar, still comes from the state government. And the people I work for believe they were elected to solve problems. That's why people send them to Sacramento, to solve problems. This inherent tension between the folks in Sacramento, the governor included, I think, who believe it is their role to make things better. And we have very blunt instruments for making things better in Sacramento. We write laws and we spend money. That's basically what we do. And so our instinct is to try to write laws and spend money in ways that make things better. That's how we ended up with, 45, 50, 80 categorical programs. We were trying to make things better. That's how we ended up with sort of state-driven, the kind of accountability system that we could get, 41 votes and 21 votes and governor's signature for, was the sort of intervention, rewards, and sanctions model. So just keep in mind there is this tension that is, at the moment, a part of the system, because the marginal dollar, speaking as an economist, the marginal dollar still comes from Sacramento. So that's a tension that's going to be there that we will need to acknowledge and understand and deal with in terms of educating not just the public in our local constituencies, but also the folks who I guess are, I don't know, either that or supporters of the golden rule of the political process, which is whoever's got the gold makes the rules. So kind of keep that tension in mind. I am very optimistic that we are starting explicitly to move in a more positive direction. I liked Professor Connolly's analogy to vital signs, that the kind of information we've been getting about schools and districts is going to be varied. It's not only multiple measures, but some of it's going to be quantitative, some of it's going to be qualitative, some of it's going to be narrative, some of it's going to be binary, for all I know. And figuring out ways to display all this, to have it tell a story, and to tell a story in a way that folks at the local level and or state level, as necessary, can understand and make decisions and use it to help inform practice and behavior. I think that's what the evaluation rubric is intended to be. And so I'm optimistic that we've kind of turned a corner. We're now publicly talking about this stuff, and talking about multiple measures and developing human capital and those sorts of things that I think are positive for the system. So with that, I'll.
Thank you, Rick. Michael?
Well, thank you. I'm glad this is being filmed. I think I see the cameras back there. I think this discussion is really important, and it needs to get out to the field. Sue and Linda both know that I was not a strong opponent of local control, but I did have some questions or concerns. It's refreshing to be here today to hear the conversation around multiple measures and different assessments for our students of California. My background has been in special education and alternative education, where we did talk about the ASAM 15 years ago, the Alternative School Accountability Model, and how to really authentically assess students. So yes, again, it's refreshing to be here today. I think the conversation that David and Linda have put out is really illuminating for all of us. So I thank you for that. And I also want to say, for the trenches, I think the past decades have been really difficult under No Child Left Behind. I think we can't, and that's why I think this conversation is important to get to the field. Because if you walk into a school, there has been that shaming that someone mentioned earlier, that you could have a teacher who was very effective and working very hard, but really felt demoralized because that school may have been in PI. So, I mean, this conversation, as Sue and Rick have said, is long overdue, and I can't applaud you here for being here today, enough. And I support the theory of change as well as systems thinking. I was looking at that earlier, and I was trying to find what specifically is the problem. Linda defined it for me when she said it's school improvement, because if you look at the problem, you look at what Rick was talking about with core, they're looking at suspensions, a graduation rate, maybe A through G, students taking those courses. But I think it's all a compilation of how we bring this together brick by brick to make it all cohesive if we're going to really transform public education in California. And I want to say, I do hope that the new accountability model really tries to save us some dollars around assessment and accountability. I think a lot of money goes into assessment and accountability, and I really am a strong proponent of, I digress a bit, of really increasing teachers' salary. I think we're going to have a problem down the road in really trying to retain high-quality teachers if we can't increase their salary statewide. So I think maybe if there's some dollar savings through this, that would be great along the way. But from a county perspective, I think if you go back to a county office, we've been involved with local school districts in many arenas. I think it started, well, I want to say maybe AB 1200. Sue was the executive director for success of the County Superintendents Association, so way back when, in a different life, but so I knew her back then. But again, counties have been involved in overseeing district budgets because of the issue around bankruptcies or issues around misappropriation or expenditures around funds. So I think we've had that relationship with local school districts for many years now. I think if you go back to the second one, we come back with the Williams lawsuit. Okay, so counties were, okay, we're going to be involved in ensuring that you have high qualified teachers, you have textbooks, you have clean facilities. We're going to be involved in that piece as well. We were also involved in the Quality Education Investment Act, QUIA. So going back to this whole accountability in the LCAP process, when counties were really asked to take a dynamic role in oversight, I think it was received more graciously than I would say in the past, because Sue was talking about trust. It's also about relationships. And I think that, I mean, they go hand in hand. If the county superintendent doesn't have a relationship with those districts in his county, it's going to be very difficult for him to work with them to improve that LCAP on a positive level. And I think, and that's where we want to go. As you can hear the conversations being very optimistic. How can we help districts succeed and avoid the dysfunction? And so I think that that history with districts has allowed county superintendents to really, even though it hasn't been a piece of cake and a cakewalk, because when in fact we first bring this to our district superintendents, it's like, one more thing the county's going to do to me. And I think, no, it's not. That's not the case. It's not the county doing it to you. We're going to work together. And I think now, 1 year into it, I think we all see that it's a problem that we can all solve if we work together on this particular issue. So it's been a work in progress, and it's not going to be solved overnight. I do think that, and when I speak locally, I talk to my city mayors and board of supervisors. I think one of the most important positions now in a locality or municipality is that of a school board trustee. Think of all of the influence and power you have now to really transform public education in your district. I mean, and that's a huge responsibility. And I think, I talk to college students too. I mentioned you need to get more involved in civic engagement. If you look at the electorate turnout this past, where are we? I don't know where it is, in November and even June, it was abysmal. And I think that if we are to really try to get that younger voice in this discussion, we need to look at civic engagement, as well as part of the whole process. And I think, lastly, I think one of the byproducts of the 8 priorities is really getting the student and parent voice. I know that many districts have been loath to get the student and parent voice. I think those that engage them and bring them into the process will be far better off down the road. So I'll stop there, but I think, again, my mind has shifted, and I'm really in favor of local control. There are going to be some bumps in the road, let me tell you, and 2 for me are induction and career tech, but I think we're trying to solve those problems, and I think we're moving forward with those. I believe in strong professional development for leaders as well, and I think that all superintendents, those who are in core already get the professional development, but I think those even, I know if AXA is not here, I know they're moving towards that, but I think as we have these discussions around what's best for students and communities, we need to engage leaders in this provocative thought so they can bring this type of thinking back to their districts. So I'll stop there and I'll get back to the moderator.
Excellent. So we're going to start with Q&A, and I think I'll just throw one out there to start to get people the courage to get out there and ask the questions. So the first question I have is, as we've been collectively reflecting on this moment in time and to rethink our accountability system, various folks have talked about kind of the punitive nature of the previous system and really wanting to move to this concept of continuous improvement and support systems and really thinking about capacity building. And the collaborative is going to play a critical role in that. I'm wondering, as you think about bringing that work to scale, how we can potentially move away from this dynamic where we think about just the lowest performers. It's like we're going to gear our whole system around 20 or 50 districts that we have deep concerns about, and then in the process stifle the rest of the districts or not really provide them locally tailored support that can support systems change in their communities. And I'm just wondering, are there any initial thoughts from you all about that as a concept and about how we have some early wins and then go to scale, but really think about all of our districts because there's room for improvement for all of us and for all of our communities.
I'll start off and then punt to Sue because we kind of talked about this over lunch a little bit. The theory of the reform is that districts will have to engage communities, and communities will be at the table talking about how are we doing and looking at the data. And the transparency is actually part of the accountability. The data is there and the goals have been set and you can monitor that. So the first bite of the continuous improvement apple is at the local level. And counties are intended then to both support that process through professional development with superintendents and members of the local districts and so on, but also then to be engaged in the reflection and feedback to the districts with the every 3-year reports and the annual updates. Now, that's another second bite at the continuous improvement apple, which may operate that way or may end up being pro forma if it's not designed and enabled and managed in a way that does drive that improvement. The CCEE's role is to work with both districts that are referred because the counties feel they can't do enough to help them, or who raise their hand and say, I would like your help. And we hope there will be both, that there will be a lot of both, although there will be a capacity expansion over time. I mean, it'll be hard at the beginning to do as much as we'll be able to do later. For all that to happen, one of the things that I think may be needed is for the CCEE to think about how it works with counties, that they're not just separate tiers, kind of divided, in like a layer cake, but that there's a way by which counties learn to do this job of stimulating and supporting continuous improvement, and districts then learn how to do that work of supporting continuous improvement, and advocates and parents and community organizations learn to be effectively engaged in that process, and so on, and that we build. I think personally that the infusion of knowledge and information from evaluations and from dissemination about what's working and what's not, and networks like what goes on in CORE are part of feeding the felt need and the felt capacity to continuously improve. But I think that's part of what we have to work out is how does that happen? And I have the image of the CCE as sort of an orchestra conductor trying to figure out how to enable these wheels of continuous improvement to operate, not just waiting, for a few districts to land in their lap.
Yeah, I would just build on that and say that at least initially, because we can't predict right now how many districts will be referred to CCEE or who will stand up and say, gee, we'd like help. But CCE has to be seen as a valuable resource. And we have to start by, I think, being a repository of lots of information. Your report's a good start, David and Linda, on what's working. I think CORE is a great example. There are other networks out there that are working together. that are seeing some good results too. And to be a broker then of saying, gee, the pairing of, gee, this district is doing particularly well in Northern California, and there's someone in Santa Cruz that could use some help. And, Michael knowing about that and doing that pairing. I think the other piece of it is, too, is sending very clear signals, and this sort of morphs into the accountability system from the state about what are a few state priorities that are very important that all districts should be focused on. Because with all due respect, 8 priorities is too many. I was trying to model, I remember I said 3 virtues. 3 is a good number, in my view. So I think we have to be clear. I would even, the table that Professor Conley provided was a good one to say input, process, outcome. I'd overlay state and local on top of that and say what of those outcome measures are important to the state for all districts. And remember, we have 1,000 of those. We have about an equal number of charter schools. We have 6 million students in a tremendously geographically diverse state. So we have a big universe in which we have to operate, and I think we have to again be mindful of that and send very clear signals so that then at the local level they can say, okay, we agree, we buy into that, we have a shared purpose, but we have a lot of other things that are important to our stakeholders, to our parents, and we're going to be transparent about that, and we're going to set reach goals for those at the local level. But again, initially I think CCEE has to start out being seen as valuable and a helpful tool to provide technical assistance and away from a punitive model.
I'll just add one piece to it, but I think that you're right. I think the CCEE, although it will be providing support to those struggling districts, I think it should be perceived as a resource to all 1,000 districts. I think that when you have the local control model coming out, initially there were perceived winners and losers. And I think even though it might have been a high-performing school perceived as a loser financially, they still are part of our system. And I think that the CCEE can play a role in all 1,000 districts, even though it may take time. Again, we're talking, 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road. I think it would be, it could be valuable if it could do that. The other thing I would just add on, I think the issue we have to be careful with local control is the silo effect. I think when you talk about local control, you're sort of saying local, solve the problem. And I think as Sue mentioned, there's valuable resources throughout the state. I think we really have to, build capacity for regionalization as well, and look at local being more regional as well.
The only thing I'd add on to particularly what Sue said is, like with respect to the eight priorities and which are more important than others, as Sue knows, she and I and Rick and some others were in meetings a couple of years ago, could have been way more. We pitched a lot of stuff overboard. We had both AP and IB and a couple of other things that were highly correlated measures of, the top performers. And we actually tried to cut it down a whole lot more than it could have been. The other thing is about local control. I live in the political environment, and I'm a former school board member. I know got at least one other school board member here somewhere. How you actually operationalize this local control and the interaction between the community involvement and the people ultimately making decisions about allocation of resources and professional development and human resources and all those things at the district level. Ultimately, it's the responsibility of the school board. And as you pointed out a little while ago, nobody shows up to vote. And so how do you hue and cry in the community about something, and yet they need to show up to the polls and vote and make sure that the leadership in their district reflects those local priorities. And that's, I fear, in some communities in the state, a big disconnect that are we going to be comfortable with some districts who, for whatever reason, local political or whatever reasons, are unsuccessful or not, prepared to make changes, and I don't know how we deal with that.
Questions from the audience? Please.
No.
I can repeat it too, if you.
Okay. So I think that the
Yeah, I agree. Schools are mentioned in that list only because of charter schools that might be referred. Okay, so those are schools. But otherwise, the CCEE will be dealing, primarily with districts. And I think you're right that, I mean, we are learning things about what enables districts to improve. But it is a much smaller kind of knowledge base, and there's a lot more to work on there than at the school level. It's important, actually, I think it's a good move to be directing attention to the district level rather than the school level, because many individual schools are struggling because of things the district has done to them or things the district hasn't done for them. And just focusing attention, as we did for many years, on school level improvements often left schools still in dysfunctional contexts or serving the highest need kids with the fewest resources or any number of other things. And the district could sort of say, not my problem, we're focusing on the school. So I think districts are the place where the leverage should be both cultivated and focused. And it could have an equity-oriented effect, at least within districts, to hold districts accountable for, the broad swath of schools rather than just focusing on the individual school by themselves. But we were really not trying to change the purview of the CCEE.
And Rick, you had a comment as well?
Since I actually wrote that law, it wasn't drafted to exclude schools as the target of assistance, I guess. School districts, if they had like some of the schools in Rick's upper right-hand box, that were both low and moving in the wrong direction on certain indicators, there's nothing that precludes a district from asking for assistance from the collaborative to come in and bring in resources. Yeah, bring in resources. School's not mentioned in the law per se as to request assistance because the school's not a legal entity. School doesn't have, as hiring doesn't contract, the school governance is something that is a creature of the school district.
But I think to your point about CCEE trying to focus on system improvement, at least for me, I think that would be critical for us to do, largely based on the conversation we're having here and much research about it, that schools exist within districts. They're not the unit of governance, right? And really, under LCFF, the whole notion about giving differentiated resources based on the students you're serving then puts the responsibility squarely back on the school board to say, I have to differentiate within my district to determine the schools that have the greatest need, to make sure that those students are getting the equal educational opportunities. So I do think we have to focus on system improvement and making sure that the district is as functional as it possibly can be so the schools can be successful.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask one more quick question and then we'll turn it back over to the audience as well if there are other questions. One of the key themes that seems to be coming up consistently in addition to this broader notion of continuous improvement, and I think, Linda, you talked about that first bite of the apple of information and really kind of digging in there, right? And one of the things we know is that different stakeholders need different types of information. So the classroom teacher is going to need more nuanced information or formative information, and principals and district leaders, the broader public, parents, students, taxpayers, policymakers up at the state, so there are these varying degrees of the need for information, and we're moving into this new realm around multiple outcomes and multiple indicators. In that context, what role can we play for some efficiency's sake and for maybe some cost savings to think about, what pieces the state supports, which pieces need to be, devolved locally, any initial reactions to kind of that element of information management and transparency and how we continue to hold up these ideas around the achievement gap. I'm just curious if there's some initial thoughts around that.
Well, I think when I kind of tried to count up the indicators, about maybe 60% of the indicators in the LCAP priorities can be looked at with state. that already exists, and it's in various places. It's on the website, it's in the SARC, it's somewhere. Carrick knows where it is. Right. So I think it would be a service to districts for the state if there was some kind of a tool or a report or something. It would be a service for the state to populate those things that it already has the data for local districts, so they don't have to search around. I did watch a lot of charter schools and local districts trying to find data that if you're not a data wonk, you don't know it's already there, and they're trying to make things up, and So I think that makes sense, that the state should populate some kind of a tool for districts with the data that are available. And then districts will be, creating measures of other things. I think a conversation can go on in the state. Are there other areas where it could be made easier for districts? I know the core districts, for example, are using the Healthy Kids Survey and trying to revise it and revamp it so that they have ongoing survey data that all their 10 districts can benefit from. It might be nice if the state made some tools available like that, like a short version of surveys that teeny tiny districts that don't have the capacity to develop their own could tap and use and add their own questions to. Here's some that get at various things, and then I can add my own. So I think over time we'll be able to figure out where the state can be helpful without getting in the way. Mm-hmm. And without recreating the fallacy of hierarchical intelligence, that there's like one way and it's everybody's going to have to do it the same way because, so the framework ought to be a helping framework. Where can the state be helpful? And the state will, of course, continue to need its own data systems and that aggregate and do what they have been doing. But we ought to bring those together where they fit so that those are helpful to locals as well, without trumping the local energy that you want to have around thinking about how, the data we collect is helpful to us. And that's not always going to be the same way. This one example of that, for example, I watched this at the federal level with the data quality campaign and so on. Somebody decided we should have, the same counting for graduation rates. And their graduation rates are actually, designed and counted in a lot of different ways. They tell you different information. And that the only one that should count, that should matter, is four-year graduation rates. Well, for a lot of systems, that is not very helpful. And in fact, it creates disincentives to serving the kids with the highest needs, who may, leave school and, they're pregnant and they may want to come back, or they may not be able to carry as many credits, or they're in the criminal justice system and so on. So a single way of having a single measure, which some people fought very, very hard for, not only was not helpful to a lot of communities that were striving hard to get a higher 5- and 6-year and even 7-year graduation rate, but it actually created disincentives for them to keep those kids on the rolls or to take them back because they had a cost but no benefit in the counting system. So that's just one example. Sometimes trying to do everything the same way and just somebody at the top deciding this will be the one way without consulting people who actually do the work with the kids in the schools can be as problematic as it is helpful. And so we need to be humble in thinking about how to get advice from local districts in developing the ways in which state assistance in data collection and so on will also unfold.
I think just briefly, one way we could be helpful, I think, is once we refine our message. I think, it wouldn't even hurt to have a public relations campaign. As Rick mentioned, if the public, they're really, even though their parents are engaged in the process, supposedly maybe, 10%, 15% at a local school district level, if we're lucky, maybe 25% or 40%. But I think if you really try to, as we move to this major transformation, to really engage the public from a public relations campaign effort, I think we may get more people involved in the process. Schools aren't very good at messaging. I mean, I'll be the first to raise my hand in Santa Cruz County. It's very difficult because that message is very broad. But I think that as we look at, statewide, making some major transformations, I do think that maybe we should look at, you know, a statewide public relations campaign to really engage the community and the parents and the private sector as well.
So I just would mention that we are trying to do an electronic template for the local control accountability plan. And before Carrick throws something at me, we're not pre-populating it with data right at the moment. But that's certainly the goal. So I think there are, to Linda's point, there are a lot of tools that the state can make available that would make the local education agencies' lives a lot more simple. I think the other thing we should do, though, at the state level, this is a little bit of a plug for Rick, is to try to align our expectations across all of our state priorities. Carrick mentioned this earlier. We've got the SARC, we have the single plan for student achievement, on and on and on. There's a big long list of it. And if we truly are moving to the 8 state priorities and the local control accountability plan is kind of the central organizing tool for accountability, it would be great if we sort of cleared out all the underbrush, and I think that would be a huge assistance to LEAs.
There's a here over there. Other questions? John?
So, for this continuous improvement system to work, the key piece is having our teachers continuously improve their instructional effectiveness. And that seems to be a real weakness in the current system. And then we don't have effective teacher support and evaluation system. We don't even have an effective test and punishment. We really don't have much, I think, of a teacher evaluation. It's mostly given to districts who are overstaffed and aren't doing a good job of evaluating much of supporting. So, Linda, question to you is, what should California be doing to improve its support and assistance evaluation system for teachers? And Rick, you, is there any possibility in the horizon in the future that California might actually pay more attention to this?
So some districts do a great job of evaluation, and some do a poor job. Some have very rich, thoughtful, well-supported systems that they tie to professional learning, and it's just very uneven across the state. So I think one thing we have to think about, again, around this idea of knowledge dissemination, the state doesn't, we've been in this cutting era. Almost every program that ever existed that provided capacity, professional development opportunities for teachers and administrators got cut in the course of the last, 8 or 10 years. And the CDE got cut. And, which, agencies that were charged with helping people learn from each other also got cut. So I think we have to think about how do we build back without having 55, categorical programs, but, some capacity to let people both learn from each other and to create some regular opportunities for learning for educators. There are two things about that. One is I don't think the state necessarily needs to mandate an evaluation process, but there ought to be a way. We used to have the California School Leadership Academy, which was one place where people would come and do a lot of learning from each other. That went away. I think it, like many other California reforms, lives as a small project in West Ed now. It's where state programs went to not quite die, but to become tiny, and and maybe be watered and nurtured until another day. But I think a question for the CCEE is are there some of those capacity building or system learning opportunities that it will take up? And I think we're all going to wait anxiously for them to meet and to talk and then to figure that out. I think if it doesn't come from the CCE, we ought to try to rebuild some kind of leadership training capacity in the state for districts to learn from each other, supporting, both networkings for individual leaders to learn how to set up, good evaluation systems. How do you do PAR well? There's so many things that districts could learn from each other. The other thing that we do need is a professional development infrastructure for teachers. Subject matter projects are small. That's not the only way to do it. They shrank quite a bit. There are other ways. We need to think about what's going to be a way to build that capacity. As a principal, as a school principal, or as a teacher or other leader in the system, I need to know that if I want my teachers to learn the writing process and how to engage writing in the Common Core, and I'm in a small district and I don't have a PD capacity, that there's going to be a place I can, engage and activate for them to do that. If I want to be part of a math teachers network that's working on Common Core or whatever, that there's a place for that. And we don't have that. We have Swiss cheese across the state. So I think that that's going to be an important part of the conversation of the coming years, to figure out what's a way to ensure that that capacity is always there. Right now, there are also very few incentives for teachers. There's no requirement that you engage in professional learning for relicensure, nor are there any benefits necessarily for the professional learning that you might engage in terms of, for example, some states have a variety of kinds of credentials, badges, recognitions of study or whatever if you become, say, bilingual, and that's a skill that your school could use. It's not necessarily built into compensation, nor is it recognized in a way like our seal of biliteracy recognizes kids. So we need to be thinking about how to recognize and incentivize learning and expertise, and then how to be sure that when people want it, they can find it and that it's available.
Well, I'm not sure if part of your question was referring to Vergara or not, but first of all, I don't think anybody believes we're going to fire our way to excellence. I do think you will find the legislature sort of thinking about teacher quality issues. Evaluation that you mentioned, Linda mentioned, is terribly important. It's fundamental to everything to do with teachers and their professional practice and improvement. I think there is still this tension over, call them categorical programs. I never thought the categorical was a four-letter word myself until I started listening to certain people. The people I work for like them. We wrote them all, right? I think you would find a lot of receptivity in the legislature about recreating some of the dedicated funding sources to some of these people, some of these things. Induction, professional development, some of the things like the subject matter projects that had some, that weren't district-centric, that had a larger state goal and purpose and value. But there is a tension. The governor feels strongly about deregulating the funding streams, and so we'll in that we'll have to have that conversation about there may be some things that are so important, like induction and maybe some elements of professional development, particularly when the median district size or average district size in the state is like 6,000 students. That's not a very large district. And many districts, hundreds and hundreds of districts, don't have the capacity to provide that kind of nuanced professional development that's needed. So there may be some ongoing need for a state structure to deal with that.
I'll take one other stab at it. I think that we talked about the testing and how it's gone off course. I'm not convinced we shouldn't be looking at how we restructure the school day in our schools. In other words, we still are tied to either a block schedule or a 5-period schedule, 5 days a week. Charter schools have some latitude to allow their time, if they write their charters in such a way, to maybe a 4-day-a-week or 20-hour teaching day, where you can build in time for professional development and reflection amongst your peers at that particular school. So I think that's something that we should be rethinking on at the state level. And it's all tied in the ed code, I know, at this point in time, but I think if you're really serious about trying to give teachers the ability to communicate and reflect and collaborate, there's really little time built into the school day as it is currently.
Great. Well, I hope everyone will join me in thanking our panel. We're about at time, so thanks so much.